Imagine telling a Celtic fan this, that year after years of dominance, the club would descend into chaos. That Brendan Rodgers, the man once adored, will become the face of frustration. That a revolutionary manager from North America would arrive with huge expectations only to be fired. And that in the middle of all that, Martin O'Neill, yes, I said it, Martin O'Neill would walk back through those doors one more time, not as a nostalgic figure, not as a ceremonial appointment, but the man who would save Celtic. This man left Talk Sport. He was doing Talk Sport shows the night before and went back to Celtic and gave them the best title that they have gotten in recent history. And somehow in the middle of all this madness, Hearts nearly wrote one of the greatest underdog stories Scottish football has ever seen. This is the story of how Celtic became champions of Scotland again. For years, Celtic represented certainty. League titles, control, pressure, expectation. At Celtic, success never was optional. You are not judged by whether you win. You are judged by how you win. And eventually, even Brendan Rodgers started feeling that pressure. First, warning signs were subtle. Performances became flat. The energy disappeared. The squad looked emotionally exhausted. And there were games Celtic still won, but supporters could feel that there was something wrong. The intensity that once terrified opponents was fading. The midfield no longer suffocated teams. The pressings became inconsistent and the atmosphere around the club became tense. And then began a bigger problem: recruitment. Fans started questioning the board. Too many safe signings, too many projects, too many little urgencies. Meanwhile, Rangers were rebuilding, Hearts were becoming more organized, Aberdeen were finding identity again. And for the first time in years, Celtic looked vulnerable. And once vulnerability enters Scottish football, pressure becomes unbearable, especially at Celtic Park, because there's no fan base in Scotland more demanding. No, not because they are spoiled, but because they understand what Celtic means. The club built on standard, built on European ambition, built on dominance. And Brendan Rodgers suddenly looked like a manager fighting the weight of expectation instead of driving it. And then the turning point. He dropped points. Poor derby performances, injuries piling up, and most importantly, the football stopped feeling like Celtic. That was the biggest crime of all. Not losing identity. And eventually, the pressure exploded. And then came the arrival of Martin O'Neill. When the club entered crisis, Celtic needed stability. No experiments, not PR, not promises. They needed belief. And that is why Martin O'Neill returned to the club. Supporters emotionally were hit strong because Martin O'Neill is not just another manager in Celtic history. He represents one of the greatest eras in the club has ever seen. European nights, fearless football, character, leadership. He understood the badge. So when he returned in an interim role, the reaction was immediate. Suddenly, Celtic Park had energy again. The fans were singing before kickoff. Players were running harder. Former legends were speaking publicly about restoring standards. And this is what great managers do. Before tactics, before systems, before training sessions, they change the emotional pressure, the emotional temperature of the football club. O'Neill simplified everything. Play faster, play braver, fight for every second balls, stop overthinking things. He demanded personality. And for a brief period, Celtic looked alive again. Not perfect, but alive. The pressing returned. The crowd returned. The aggression returned. But there was still a problem. Martin O'Neill was never viewed as a long-term future. The board wanted modernization. They wanted innovation. They wanted a coach aligned with the modern professional football. They wanted someone who could evolve Celtic beyond domestic dominance and lead them to one of the boldest appointments. And that led them to one of the boldest appointments in club history. Wilfried Nancy. The gamble of Wilfried Nancy was one thing that football did not see coming. When Celtic hired Wilfried Nancy, reactions across football were split. Some called it visionary, some called it reckless. But one thing was undeniable: it was ambitious. Nancy represented a completely different footballing philosophy. Fluid rotations, complex build-up patterns, possessional manipulation, risk-taking from the goalkeeper. And this is not traditional of Scottish football. This was football designed to dominate space. And early on, you could see the idea. Celtic controlled possession. The passing sequence were beautiful. The structure looked intelligent. But Scottish football is more than patterns. It's more than patience, especially when you manage Celtic. Because aesthetics alone are not enough. You must win immediately, convincingly. And slowly the cracks started to appear again. The defense became vulnerable in transition. The squad struggled adapting to the complexity. The big players looked unconfident. Most importantly, the fans never emotionally connected to the project. That matters. At clubs like Celtic, tactics alone are one part of management. You're managing history. You're managing the emotions, you are managing the identity, and you're also managing the pressure that comes with wearing that badge. Nancy looked like a coach, trying to install a football philosophy before understanding the environment. Then came the European disasters, and suddenly the board faced a nightmare again. Because once European embarrassment combines with domestic inconsistency, at Celtic, the clock started ticking very fast for Wilfried Nancy. The media pressure intensified. Pundits questioned whether the club had become too obsessed with being clever. And supporters began asking a brutal question: had Celtic forgotten who they are? Then came the final blow. A derby defeat. And not just a defeat, a lifeless one. The kind where supporters leave before full time. The kind where the stadium becomes quiet. The kind where everyone knows what comes next. Wilfried Nancy was fired, and Celtic stood at the crossroads again. And there comes the second coming of Martin O'Neill. This time, Martin O'Neill did not return as a temporary solution. This time he returned to restore the soul of Celtic. The impact was immediate, not just because he reinvented the football, but because he understood something modern football sometimes forgets. Football clubs are emotional institutions, especially Celtic. One thing O'Neill restored was accountability. No excuses, no hiding, no philosophy, no speeches after bad results. Players either performed or they sat down. Training intensified. Reportedly that the training skyrocketed. Senior players regained authority inside the dressing room. Suddenly Celtics looked harder, mentally sharper, physically stronger, and tactically Neill made Celtics direct without becoming primitive. The midfield became vertical. The players attacked aggressively. The strikers stopped being isolated. But the biggest transformation was psychological. And I'm saying this because I know it could be cliche for you to be like, oh no, it was psychological. No. It was a situation where he understood that he needed to work on these players' psyche, work on them understanding that they could still win the trophy. Opponents stopped believing Celtic were vulnerable. But matters in Scotland because momentum is everything. A crowd believing again, and once Celtic Park believes, it becomes overwhelming for every single team that comes to Celtic Park. Home games turned into pressure cookers. Noise returned. The intimidation returned. The inevitable returned. And there was another crucial detail. Martin O'Neill understands moments. And he knew when to protect the players publicly, when to challenge them privately, and when to slow panic, when to ignite emotion. That is experience. And Celtic desperately needed it because the title race became far more complicated than anyone expected. Why? Because Hearts refuse to disappear. And now we have to talk about Hearts, the remarkable story that the Hearts absolutely put forth today. This is a part of the story that people will talk about for years. Because Hearts were never supposed to be here. Not financially, not structurally, not historically in the modern era. And yet somehow, they stayed alive. Week after week. While Celtic rebuked, while Rangers stumbled, while the pressure consumed everyone else, Hearts kept on collecting points. Disciplined, organized, fearless. And what made it special was how they did it. No superstar squad, no financial superpower, no global expectations, just straight up belief. Tanai Castle became a fortress. Every tackle mattered. Every transition felt dangerous. Every home game felt emotional. And the neutrals across Scotland and across the world, because I'm not even in Scotland, but I noticed Hearts. They quietly started wondering, could this happen? Could Hearts really win the league? Because we all asked these questions when Leicester won the league in the Premier League. Could Hearts be the first person outside Celtic and Rangers to win the Scottish Premier League? Because if they had done it, it would have been one of the greatest achievements in Scottish football history. Not just because of the trophy, but because of what it represented. A genuine disruption to the established order. For decades, Scottish football have largely revolved around Glasgow dominance. Hearts came dangerously close to breaking that reality. The pressure affected Celtic too, because suddenly this was no longer just about restoring pride. It became about survival. Failing to win the league during a transitional era is one thing. Losing it while Hearts complete a miracle story, that changes the history that everyone is going to remember. And Martin O'Neill knew it. Which is why the greatest achievement was not tactical. It was an emotional control. He kept Celtic focused while noise around Scottish football became deafening. And eventually experience won. Celtic pulled away. Not comfortably, not effortlessly, but like champions. On the last day of the league, their 38th game, Celtic faced Hearts. And it was winner gets all. This is why this title meant more. Because this league title did not feel like routine dominance. It felt earned. Because Celtic had to rediscover themselves. This was not a story about perfection. It was a story about identity. About remembering what Celtic actually are. Not the football laboratory. Or not the branding exercise. A giant in football institution built on emotion, pressure, history, and winning. Martin O'Neill understood that better than anyone else. And that is why his second stint became so powerful. Because sometimes football clubs do not need revolution. Sometimes they need reconnection to standards, to supporters, to culture, to fearlessness. In the process, Scottish football got one of its most dramatic title races in years. Hearts earned respect, Celtics regained authority, and Martin O'Neill reminded everyone why certain managers become larger than football itself. Not because of the tactics boards, not because of they understand people. And in the end, that changed everything. And now, the funny thing, you can actually tie it into what Manchester United have just done. The news that Michael Carrick has agreed a 2-year plus 1 contract with Manchester United to become the manager of Manchester United could tell us, could this be a repeat of what Martin O'Neill has done with Celtic, as for what Carrick will do with Manchester United? But here's the scary part. This might not be the beginning, because now Celtic face a new question. Do they continue building around Martin O'Neill's identity, or do they risk another reinvention? Let me know what you guys think about this down in the comment. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that follow button, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. Celtics are champions of Scotland once again.